Previously on the history and evolution of Dragon Ball games.
Dragon Ball GT was over, and it would take Bandai 5 years to realize that the hype was not dead.
5 years. 5 years of no Dragon Ball games. Honestly, I don't know how we made it. Gaming did not stop, Dragon Ball games did, so we moved forward the generation of consoles. 2 generations even, if we're talking about the handheld consoles. From the Game Boy, we moved past the Game Boy Color, and now people were playing around with the Game Boy Advance. And that's how Dragon Ball games would make a return. Partnering up with Atari, at the time Infogrames, who had more experience publishing games in the West, Dragon Ball games would shift dramatically, starting with Legacy of Goku. This was actually the first Dragon Ball game developed by an American company, Webfoot Technologies. And it was bad. An action-adventure RPG where you control Goku and play through the Saiyan and Namek sagas. Oh, and also the Snakes in the Forest saga. But for as bad as the game was, it started something new. A series that is still amongst the favorites of all time for Dragon Ball fans. It was a huge success, selling more than 1 million copies in the US. So Atari made a sequel, and it improved a lot. Legacy of Goku 2 was way better. And it's probably the main reason why the Legacy of Goku series is so popular even nowadays. Gameplay was sharpened, it looked a lot better than the first one. You played as multiple characters, which helped the appeal of reliving this story through the eyes of different protagonists. You could transform, use different abilities which were unlocked at a reasonable pace, making you want to keep going so you can unlock the next thing. There was an overworld, so you had this sense of freedom and exploration. And from the success of Legacy of Goku 2, it only seemed obvious that they had to make the third one. Even though it had a different name, that game was Boo's Fury. Here you could find everything that you had on the second Legacy of Goku game, with a small exception: challenge. This game was made a little too easy for most critics, a little too casual, but even so, it was a fun experience. The Legacy of Goku series remains to this day as the most popular series on the Game Boy Advance, and this gave Atari a reason to keep their partnership with Bandai and continue releasing games on the Game Boy Advance. At the same time as the first Legacy of Goku, a very different style of game was coming out: Dragon Ball Z collectible card game. It's exactly what it sounds like. You've got attacking phases, defending phases, during which you play cards as attacks or special moves. In fact, there was a real-life Dragon Ball trading card game, and the Game Boy Advance version uses those exact same rules. Roughly at the same time, they released another card game on the Game Boy Color. They shared some similarities, but it wasn't exactly the same. This one even had a few RPG mechanics in the mix. It wasn't all RPGs and card games though. If there was something that players had already made very clear, it was that they wanted Dragon Ball fighting games. So yes, even on the Game Boy Advance we had some pure fighters. First up was Dragon Ball Taiketsu. Hey, I said pure fighters, I didn't say they were any good. Made by the same developer that brought us Legacy of Goku came Taiketsu, which is still considered to be one of the worst Dragon Ball Z fighting games ever. Another developer also tried their hand at the Game Boy Advance game. You might have heard of them, Arc System Works, and they brought Supersonic Warriors, a different style of fighting game, very weird at first, but incredibly well received. You were so mobile, flying across the entire screen, the game was fast, the way Dragon Ball was supposed to be, and story mode took an interesting approach. A series of what-if scenarios. What if Vegeta was the one who turned Super Saiyan against Frieza? What if he was the hero? And all of this made fans fall in love with it, so much so that its sequel, that came out the following year, was the first Dragon Ball game on the Nintendo DS. The game became a tag team style of fighter where you could choose a team of 3 characters to fight against an enemy or another team. Again, sound familiar? However, the reception of this game was a bit mixed, so this is where the series ended. But Bandai would find this new partnership with Arc System Works extremely valuable in the future. So, to recap, on the Game Boy Advance we had RPGs, we had card games, we had fighters, but that wasn't everything. They also tried their hand at side-scroller beat-em-up type games, and that's how my personal favorite Dragon Ball game on the Game Boy Advance came to be. Advanced Adventure, developed by someone you might also be familiar with, developer Dimps. It followed the story of original Dragon Ball. The controls were so smooth. It played very well. The game was challenging enough to keep you on your toes. You had mini-games throughout the story to keep gameplay fresh, and even boss fights. Sure, the one-on-one game mode might be a bit straightforward and not the best fighting game of the group, but it was competent and made that game a more complete package. And hey, since Dimps could make a side-scroller beat 'em up, Webfoot Technologies decided to do the same with a Dragon Ball GT game, Transformations. and they completely ruined it. They even had a sequel planned and announced, but that ended up being cancelled. And with that, between 2002 and 2005, Dragon Ball games were a big deal on the Game Boy Advance. In parallel, during that same time period, they were an even bigger deal on the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. Enter Dragon Ball Z Budokai. To this day, the Budokai series is one of the most beloved in the entire history of Dragon Ball games. Once again, developed by Dimps, Budokai took the world by storm, despite critics giving the game mixed reviews. It became the best-selling Dragon Ball game to date. It was Dragon Ball in the new generation of consoles. You played with 3D models on a 2.5D plane. Characters could be customized to include moves, buffs, transformations, meaning you could customize your favorite Dragon Ball characters, according to your own playstyle, or simply with what you thought was cool at the time. Story mode featured cinematic cutscenes, making the action feel that much more epic. Budokai 2 significantly improved the visuals, landing some better Metacritic scores. Gameplay was polished, the roster expanded, story mode changed quite a bit, which didn't please everyone. The first chapters of story mode gave you a game board representing a saga, which you would clear to move on to the next board, which was the next saga. It introduced fusions, which would also be available from customizing your characters, and all of that led to the pinnacle of the series, Budokai 3, which unfortunately did not come out for the GameCube. It was a PlayStation 2 exclusive. Using the previous games as a basis, the fighting system was completely revamped, and most of it, if not all of the changes, were for the better. Beam clashes, a fatigue meter, the transformation system was changed, and all of these tweaks resulted in happier critics and happier fans. Story mode went back to telling the original story, but allowed you to select the character you wanted to play as. So if you wanted to play through Yamcha's story mode, a lot of it was just reading, hey, this happened and Yamcha wasn't there, so I guess you don't get to play. Moving on. That was kind of funny, but also made story mode worth playing through with all the characters. And for the longest time, Budokai 3 was my personal favorite Dragon Ball game, and the feeling is universal. Those who played it share very fond memories of times spent battling in story mode, unlocking new abilities and characters, or simply playing against their friends. Budokai 1 and 3 were both remade in 2012 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 in an HD collection, a testament to their success and how well they held up with time. With Bandai successfully establishing a new series on the PlayStation 2 with Budokai, Atari wanted to take advantage of this partnership and make a game of their own, also on the PlayStation 2. So seeking out a new developer, Avalanche Studios, who at the time were owned by Disney, they made Dragon Ball Z Sagas. And they didn't just put it out on the PlayStation 2, but also on the GameCube and the original Xbox, making this the first Dragon Ball Z game to be released on a non-Japanese console, the first Xbox Dragon Ball game. Sadly, it wasn't a great game. They tried to take Dragon Ball in a new direction, giving you a level-based structure with collectibles and abilities to unlock as you play. It even gave you different characters to play as, but it wasn't fun or functional. It was a hassle to play. You fought the controls all the time, and the level design was also not so great. And perhaps because of that, this would not only be the first Dragon Ball game on the original Xbox, but also the last one. The PlayStation 2 saga was far from over, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. We continue this series on our next episode with Budokai Tenkaichi, and then Dragon Ball got weird. But from that weirdness, a new series was born, a series that persisted all the way up to the 3DS. But that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching another part of the history and evolution of the Dragon Ball games. In case you missed part 1 or 2, click the playlist up there. If you're in the mood for something else, there's also the video at the bottom. But as always, thank you very much for watching. My name's Globku, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.